What happens when CZ refuses to make a bull barrel pistol? You get an Englishman to make this. In this video, I go over the CZ Customs A01 LD. Now, this is a gun that I've had my eye on for some time. In fact, it's actually been out even before I started shooting competition pistol, going back as far as 2018. Now, recently, if you've been following my channel, I've been shooting limited optics with MPA DS9s, and now I've decided to go back to carry optic, and I wanted a good reason to shoot CZs, and so this was my justification. Now, I ended up picking this up used, and I will say for what I paid for this at the end of the video because I want to focus on where you can get this today. Now, I mentioned in the intro that an Englishman ended up solving this problem. Now, if he's not an Englishman, I do apologize in advance, but that gentleman is Angus Hobdell of CZ Customs, and his background is big because he is a multiple international champion as well as a multi-division grandmaster. And I watched a video of him where he did an interview and he discussed that he approached CZ about making a bull barrel pistol. And in that video, he mentioned that they weren't really too interested, so he did what any good competition shooter would do. He solved that problem. If you go to CZ's website, these do retail for $2,600. And what's cool is now they come in an optic ready model should you choose to get that, starting at right just over $2,700. So now that is an option rather than it just being an iron-sighted model only. Now, you can outfit these and go from this basic package to wild, so that may include single action, you may get a magwell, and the list goes on. Now, nearly every one of these pistols on the market is 9, but I did check out CZ Customs website and they do offer this in 357 SIG. This does come with 2 P09 19 round magazines. And the question is, can you use 75 mags? And that answer is yes. However, you would need to change the grip panels because the width of the P09 mags are a touch wider than the 75 mags. So you can get those grips from directly at CZ Customs if you want to change that over, like I will do in the future. Now let's take a closer look at what this is all about. Now, before I do that, I have just a quick message from my YouTube manual reviewer. This gun right here as is in its factory configuration. I have not modified it, and there are no additional modifications done to this pistol. So, enjoy. All right, so now we have a closer look at this. Visually speaking, it says it is meant for business. Then you decide to grab it and you know you have something serious immediately because the first thing you do notice is in fact the weight. At 51 ounces without a magazine, it is definitely a heavyweight in that regard. The fit and finish on this thing is nothing less than outstanding because if you wiggle the slide, or try to I should say, this thing is a perfect lockup with no wiggle anywhere. And if you look all throughout here, you can tell this has all been hand fit to the T, and it just sits in there nice and flush. Now I'm going to compare a lot of this portion of this to the Shadow 2. Specifically my Cajunized one. And here's the thing, there's going to be a ton of detail that you will notice between these two. Now, the first thing I want to point out is the frame. If you notice here that there is a step here in the frame that's an indentation, whereas with the A01 LD, it's actually being rounded all throughout here. So what this feels like in here is that it fills out your hand nice. Now, I never noticed that until I grabbed this gun because the Shadow 2 really gets my thumb a little bit closer to this, but this just makes it to where it just feels, for better lack of words, perfect when you fit your hand up and underneath there. Now, it's really hard to show on camera some of the other little details, but when I looked at these closely and measured them, the actual height of the beaver tail sits a little bit higher, as well as that undercut, so you are actually higher up in the gun. Because this is made with P09 mags in mind, is that it's actually wider, and if you could tell, it's not very much, but it is in fact wider. I'll try to put that here to give you an idea, but if you look edge to edge here, versus the Shadow 2, you can see that it's much larger, and even the little internal magwell they have going is way more pronounced on the A01 than you would see with the Shadow 2. The A01 LD has no light rail. It is pure dust cover, whereas you at least have a light rail on the Shadow 2. Now, the one thing that stuck out to me, which was huge, were these serrations. Now, I know that's going to sound funny, but because of its bull barrel design, it actually gives it broader shoulders. Now, one of my biggest complaints specifically with any of these Shadow 2s, whether the compact or full size, is that when I go to get through the serrations, that my hands always touch the frame. So I don't exactly have that much confidence when I rack over the top. Whereas with the A01 LD, because it's broader shouldered, that is way easier to deal with. Now, to the average person out there, that might sound funny that I obsess over that, but when you do an unloaded start and you happen to miss those serrations or get your hands hung up, that is the difference between 2 to 3 seconds right there. The safeties on them are interesting. At first, I wasn't too sure if I was going to like them, because what I like about the Shadow 2 Compact as well as the full size as an option is you can get these flat safeties. Why I like that is because I can get my hand very high up in the gun, as when you see with my grip here. Now, what I found this to be was more of an index point, and it wasn't intrusive to anything when I was going to hold the guns. Now, while I can't confirm it right now, I don't believe these safeties are universal with any of the Shadow 2 or 75 series. They are specifically made for this gun. The sear and sear housing inside of it is all connected to the frame, similar to what you would find on the Cocker models or even the 1911-2011 design. The reason for that is that they intended to have less tolerance stacking by connecting it to the frame. So if you are getting with any of the Shadow 2 series, whether compact or full size, the sear is actually easy to remove once you've pulled out the safety. It just comes right out. What's funny is if you take the 97, which I have a decocker model here, and I'll flip it over, you'll see that you have extra spots on here. Now, that is for the entire sear and all the springs that manage both the sear itself and the decocker. Now, why I mention that is it is a pain in the butt. So if you decide to take apart the A01 LD, I would highly recommend that you go to Cajun Gun Works and buy a slave pin to push in it when you decide to take it out if you need to. Now let's talk about the most distinguishing thing on this gun, and it's the bull barrel. So I'll just pull it back here. As you see, it is everything you would expect out of a bull barrel. It's about consistent with just a touch under the 2011 size that you see on some of those. When you take this apart, it is an incredible piece of machinery and the highlight of this gun's design. Now, there is one funny portion of this, okay? So when this gun is out of battery, okay, just push it back a little bit here. If you can hear that, that is a lot of rattling. And what that is just simply the edge of the barrel hitting against the slide. Now, why I point that out isn't necessarily something I would say is a flaw of quality or anything like that. It is inherent to the design of having a bull barrel on specifically a CZ. Because if you look on Shadow 2s, when I'll take this compact, take it out of battery very slightly there, you have a little bit of knocking noise. Now, a lot of that is mitigated because you have this bushing on the end. So now that you don't have that on here, when it's out of battery, it's just gonna knock. And the reason why I point that out is the first time you may go to rack it back, you may hear a little bit of that chatter. Now let's talk a little bit about the grips. These are in fact a G10 type of material here that are respectably aggressive. What's neat is that you have a lot finer checkering on the rear and front side here. And when you add up the fact that the frame itself is wider, it feels more like a palm swell in the hand. And as I'd mentioned earlier, that as it is right here, it will not take CZ75 magazines. Now, why I mention that is because I've shot Shadow 2, so I would prefer not to buy new mags, especially if ones I have dialed in for 24+1. Now, CZ Custom does offer a specific grip panel, which is made by VZ, and you'll even see that they have the lettering in here to indicate that you can run 75 mags, and you just have to swap these out and you are good to go. Now, the sights on this thing are fairly straightforward. I was really surprised that they are not the adjustable type like you would see with the Shadow 2s. You have a fiber optic front here with a fairly narrow post and a blacked out rear sight. Now, the why I point out this is a narrow post is when you are actually looking through the sights on this, I find that I prefer the narrow post after trying this when calling shots. So anytime I went out to distance and it called for much more precision when this thing would turn to 0, I found these sights to be very helpful. Now we're going to talk about the trigger, and this whole entire group is thought out with all those little tiny details in mind. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the trigger shoe on this is not adjustable like you would see on a Shadow 2. And I point that out because when I was watching that video of Angus going over the A01, he talked about this being a perfectly machined piece of metal to this frame. And when you look at it in terms of the whole ecosystem, he does point out that there is virtually no wiggle, at least to the point where you can get as much as possible with this design. When I look at my Shadow 2, you know, it does wiggle more, although we agree that the Shadow 2 trigger is pretty good, right? But once you start to engage it, you start to notice those tiny little details, especially if you spent time playing with these guns. You'd feel that as you go through the movement. Now, in terms of pull, I did verify that it does in double action pull at 8 pounds. And in single action, it does come at 3. And I want to walk you through that characteristic because there is a noticeable difference between this and the Shadow 2. And it has a touch of pre-travel here. And when you go into double action, you just pull it straight back for an 8-pound pull. Now, I would say this 8-pound feels a touch lighter because it's so smooth when it goes through. Bringing it out, there's no type of stacking when you roll through this. That pull is consistent with what you would find on a Cajun 9 Shadow 2. And of course, this does have their version of the reach reduction to it. So when in single action, it's just right there, as you can see. And walking you through that characteristic, well, as you go through it, it's not much at all. And from a perceived feel perspective, that feels lighter than 3 pounds. It feels very, very light. And that reset, and I have to pull that out real slowly for you guys here, is very audible, and you're right there on that wall, break. So definitely an excellent trigger. Now, is it 2011 realm? No. That has everything to do with its design being at hinge. So considering that is on a hinge design, that's probably one of the shorter resets I have seen on a double action, single action gun that's not a 1911. All right, so now we're gonna dive into the shooting experience. Now, before I do that, I ask if you like this video, please hit that like button as that helps me a lot. And you are gonna wanna subscribe because I'm always coming out with CZ content, and you can check out my website for various CZ videos if you wanna see any more content on that. And if you've been following my channel for some time, you know I like to keep data on how the guns perform. I'm gonna make that live on my website, and I'll leave a link for that in the description. Actually really excited to see how this goes. Okay, I don't know if that's the original mag there, but I'm going to keep it in single action for this. But automatically I can feel there's a nice amount of weight in my hand. So getting IP here, yeah, that grip feels very familiar for me. Shooting a ton of Shadow 2s. Okay, hands are a little sweaty. All right, holy cow, that's soft. Wow, I mean this is just silly. Okay, staying on task here. All right. Yeah, that is really soft shooting and accurate too. Yeah, I gotta get used to it, but there's definitely the weight you can feel in this gun, but it is just flat. It's flat, it's smooth, and it's just predictable in what it's gonna do. Man, that is way different than shooting a Shadow 2 for sure. I mean, just off the bat, the characteristics of it are that there is just basically no move in the hand, and a lot of the recoil impulse is mitigated through the weight of the gun. Yeah, pretty darn awesome. So let's see how it does in the rest of the test. I think it's safe to say that I am borderline a Shadow 2 homer, because if you've been on my channel for some time, I have shot quite a few, and this was a big surprise, as you saw. And it only made me more excited to get right into the evaluation portion of this. Now, right after that first impressions, I went right directly into the accuracy drill, because that is what this pistol is known for, and it did not disappoint. Now, I will take responsibility for them being a little bit higher on the grouping, because I was aiming right at the T-Rex there. So my point of index and aim for this gun was actually a touch high, and this is why I like to do this drill, to make that adjustment. And as you'll see, I did start to get excited, which is why the group started to disperse a little bit, because this gun feels so soft to shoot, and the reset on this thing is so tactile compared to most Shadow 2s that I just wanted to keep getting back into the trigger. But the gun is definitely capable of doing a 1-inch group at 15 yards. As I did more research on this, I did find that it was tuned to shoot 115. If you're not familiar with that, from the competition perspective, that's typically your cheap ammo. Now, there is a known benefit to shooting 115 in the fact that it does exit the muzzle faster. Now, what that equates to is a higher probability that it will be more accurate. So, the gun is inherently designed to shoot very accurate using faster ammo. And I found that my sweet spot was doing 22 splits with this gun. Now, I could get more wild with it, but I think if I really wanted to tune this thing for doubles, I would probably go a touch softer, as I found out that the hammer spring is 14 and the recoil is about 13 pounds, which on my Shadow 2s I run about 11-pound spring. So there is room to tune that if you so choose and you want to tune it for that, but I personally wouldn't recommend it. Now, on this particular drill, I did feel the weight that was on the front side of this gun, both between the bull barrel and the long dust cover. I could feel this thing wobbling a touch in recoil, but nothing that really jumped out to me to say that it would hinder my performance. It's just something I noticed over other guns I shoot. Now, normally in sequence, I do a 25-yard build drill, but I'm actually going to save that for last, because that is really interesting. So I'm going to talk about the transition drill. Now, on the transition drill, I was really surprised where I landed with this in terms of its speed, as I was doing sub 5-second drills with an average of 4.93. Now, if you've been on my channel, that puts this in about in the realm of comped 2011s. So guns nearly about double and triple the price. There's a handful of reasons why I was able to extrapolate that type of performance. One being the weight in general. When a gun is this heavy, it is easier to stabilize on the target, and then between a nice trigger on single action, I could light off rounds way quicker. The weight and the balance is in the right spot, as you can see here. So when I would swing this gun, it didn't feel awkward to swing around. If anything, I felt more confident. And the more confident you feel in shooting, you tend to want to be a little bit more aggressive. And where we landed with an average hit factor was 9.186. To give you reference of where that about landed on this channel, is that it was just right behind the Staccato XC, which has an average of 4.83 and a hit factor of 3.969. Now, I did save the best for last in the 25-yard build drill. In this case, the trigger and the weight are going to be the stars of this particular drill. And I'll let the numbers do the speaking for us. Now, for the average time, it was a blistering average of 3.45 seconds. That is the fastest gun I've ever had on this channel. And a large part of that had to do with how well this gun returned to zero and my confidence in seeing the sights and going for it. Now, however, this drill does boil down to its accuracy. And because I have an 8-inch target 25 yards away, I was too excited maybe. I wasn't quite getting the accuracy that this gun could if I just maybe tuned it back to about 2 to 3 tenths on the time. To give you an idea too, the splits at that range were in the 35 to 38 range. So yes, this gun is absolutely flying at that speed. Now, the 3 guns that I do have ahead of this in terms of hit factor were the Shadow 2 Compact, the SIG 226X5 Legion, as well as my MPA DS9 IDPA compliant model, which is the ported model. Now, keep in mind, all 3 of those guns had dots, so it was easier to get an ideal sight picture and lay out rounds. Now, with that said, the hit factor on those guns were in the range of 7.3 to 7.4. Where this gun landed, because I had quite a few more Charlies, was 6.787. So I could probably extrapolate the points if I spent more time with it and get to it where I'm getting more alphas, but this was just where I landed for that day. Now, I do have plans to throw an optic on it, and I'm not sure if I'll revisit it in terms of where I land with it, but I would garner that it'd be very competitive. Looking just at the competition component, for IDPA, I'm just going to categorize it as nope. And the reason for that is due to weight. Where this gun was most likely optimized and meant to land at when it was designed was in either IPSC or USPSA's production division. And that makes a lot of sense because this is only going to shoot 9 minor, so you wouldn't be able to take advantage of major scoring in limited. So it was essentially made for one division. Now, I do plan to get it milled, and I'm going to run carry optic with it. And kind of a fun fact is that I like to run the Ghost Hydra P for my Shadow 2s. So if you are running that holster, this would just fit right in there. As I'd mentioned earlier on, I did in fact buy this gun used, and based on its condition, I'd say this thing was primarily someone's safe queen, and it maybe has 500 to at most 1,000 rounds through it based on its condition. And a reason why I point that out is because the handful of videos that are out there about the A01 LD, they talk about them being broke in before they'll be reliable. Well, at least in my testing, I had 0 issues with reliability and showed 0 signs of that it would have any type of hiccup. This is the best part, because the iron sight models are not particularly desired by most people out there. I bought this low round one for $1,500 on Gunbroker, of course, plus tax and fees, but guys, with the retail of $2,600, this is not a bad day for me, and I'll probably spend about another $150 for an optic mill. And I do want to hear what you guys think. Do you have experience with the A01 LD, or have you handled one? Sound off in the comments below, because I want to hear your perspective. The thing is, I did buy this gun not only to do a review on it and satisfy my curiosity, but to see if I in fact would want to shoot this in competition. And my answer to that is I already ended up buying another one of these, and funny enough, for $1,500 as well. So they're out there, guys. You do gotta kind of search for those type of deals, at least one that are obvious. And so that's gonna be my next step of the journey with the A01 LD. If you are interested in shooting USPSA carry optics with a Shadow 2, I have my full setup for my original Shadow 2 right here, and I'll leave that here, as well as my Cajun Eye Shadow 2 that I have over 10,000 rounds on, and I'll leave that review right here for you. But until then, guys, we will see you all at the range.